essentially the European Central Bank located in Frankfurt is a project of the German financial establishment. And so that you have a clash in the oil industry, you have a clash in financial institutions. It's very complex. There are lots of overlapping and cross-cutting allegiances. And then you have this split in the defense industry where you have British Aerospace Systems integrated with the big five defense contractors. Incidentally, Canada is part of that through the defense agreements and production sharing arrangements between the two countries. And then you have in Europe what is called the European Air Defense System Corporation, EADES, which is the integration of Aerospatiale Matra, the French conglomerate on the one hand, and Deutsche Aerospace, which is a subsidiary of the powerful Daimler Group. And this has formed a very powerful competing defense conglomerate which does not have access to the US system of procurement, and therefore there's also competition in the production of weaponry. So you have essentially, I mean, these are not all the sectors in which there's conflict between these two economic blocks, but defense industry, oil, and currency systems are the main ones. And this hidden war particularly the hidden war between the United States and France, is something which goes back to the early 90s. It's certainly visible, although it's not reported in the media, in Central Africa, in the Rwandan Civil War, in the Congo, but also in West Africa, and it involves the confrontation of the old colonial powers, particularly France in this case, because Britain is allied with the United States, and the United States, which is establishing itself a colonial empire in Africa, using, again, triggering civil wars through covert operations and so on. All these things have been documented and studied, but they're not well understood and they're not discussed in the newspapers. So that we are dealing with a blueprint for global economic, political domination. This region, as I mentioned, is strategic. Afghanistan has a border with China. Afghanistan is now heavily militarized. Several of the former Soviet republics bordering onto, because it borders onto China, China's western frontier. Similarly, in recent years, there's been a militarization of the South China Sea. The ultimate rogue enemies are China and Russia. It's no secret to anybody in the military intelligence community. In February of 2002, the United States issued what was called its Nuclear Posture Review. And the Nuclear Posture Review was a redefinition of its nuclear policy, and it says we are now going to use nuclear weapons on a preemptive basis to protect ourselves against the rogue enemies. And they actually listed in the statement of this Nuclear Posture Review, they listed, of course, the well-known rogue enemies, the rogue states, Iran, Iraq, Syria, North Korea, Libya, but they also included Russia and China, okay, as stating very clearly that nuclear weapons are directed, nuclear warheads are directed to these countries, which in principle are supposed to be friends of America, at least officially. Now, another important development in this Nuclear Posture Review happened on the 6th of August 2003, which happens to be Hiroshima Day, 58 years ago. A secret meeting was held at the Ophut Central Command base in Nebraska, which is really the big sort of military base. They invited representatives from the private sector, Wall Street, etc., to discuss the development of nuclear weapons for preemptive use. And there's been a whole propaganda campaign which has been launched already even before the war in Iraq, that the new generation of tactical nuclear weapons, the so-called mini-nukes, are harmless to civilians, etc., because the explosion is underground, etc. No discussion of radiation effects of these nuclear warheads. The mini-nukes, they sound like harmless toys, but they have an explosive capacity which varies between 1/3 to 6 times a Hiroshima bomb, and they are to be used in theater warfare, okay, alongside conventional weapons. Their delivery system is similar to that of these so-called bunker buster bombs. And it's interesting, if you read the press carefully, you will have noticed that barely a couple of weeks before President Bush's famous State of the Union address, which was back in February of this year, a White House spokesman said, we will not hesitate to use nuclear weapons if we are attacked with weapons of mass destruction. Okay? That was an official statement of the White House. Now, what's his name? The British Minister of Defense, what's his name? Hoon, yes, Hoon, made the same statement, made exactly the same statement to the House of Commons prior to the war in Iraq, but his statement was much more explicit and even more frightening, because he said, we will not hesitate to use our Trident nuclear weapons if we are attacked with weapons of mass destruction, knowing, of course, that the weapons of mass destruction were non-existent, okay? Because after all, that intelligence was known at the time, and we knew it and everybody else knew it, okay? But the fact of the matter is that nuclear war is part of is a military assumption. It is now being developed. It is being developed with the private sector because there's money to be made in that. Of course, we also have, if you look at this broader region, you also come to realize that we're not strictly talking about the nuclear capabilities of Britain or the United States, which in any event constitute the main threat. But we're talking about Israel, which, for the record, in fact, is more advanced than Britain. It's the 5th nuclear power in the world today, not officially, but in terms of the scientific assessments of their capabilities and sophistication is that they're more advanced than Britain in their nuclear technology, and all of the Israeli warheads are pointed to cities in the Middle East as well as Russia. Okay, and so we have here a situation where the war has extended from Afghanistan to Iraq, and now one is hinting that the next stage is Iran, and already, I mean, it's already included in the blueprint of the PNAC, because the PNAC says very explicitly, the PNAC's objective is to, quote, fight and decisively win in multiple simultaneous theater wars. This as a means to achieve the objective of Pax Americana. The war agenda does not stop with Iraq. It is part of a continuous process. It is a project of world domination. There's no question about it. And it ultimately targets China and Russia. It also, in a sense, also targets the European Union. At least its objective is to gain economic and political dominance in relation to competing world powers. So that, I mean, in history this kind of situation emerges. It's a confrontation between competing empires, and I think we have to understand it in that particular way. And that's why I try to look at it in terms of the various underlying objectives of this war, which is petroleum. It's clear that anybody who gains control over 70% of the world's supplies of oil has a tremendous leverage in relation to any other competing economic power in the world. Okay, and that is certainly one of the objectives of this war. Now,